I'm leaving with her." Tristan said it at his own wedding, gripping his mistress's hand while his plus-size bride stood frozen before everyone. "She's the woman I actually want." Evelina's humiliation turned to fury. She ripped off her ring, hurled it at him, then crossed the room and grabbed the devastatingly handsome stranger Tristan hated most. Before anyone could stop her, she kissed Cassiel Romano. The entire wedding went silent. Cassiel, the city's most feared Mafia boss, kissed her back. Then Tristan turned around, saw them, and completely lost control. The kiss lasted only seconds, long enough for Evelina's anger to burn through the humiliation, long enough for the room to disappear, and long enough for her to realize, with horrifying clarity, that Cassiel Romano was kissing her back. His hand settled at her waist, not dragging her closer, not claiming her, simply steadying her after she had crashed into him, like a woman setting fire to the remains of her own wedding. Then Evelina pulled away. Her fingers released his collar. For the first time since Tristan had walked in, holding Sloane's hand, embarrassment reached her cheeks. What had she just done? Cassiel regarded her in silence. No smug smile, no triumphant glance toward Tristan. His dark eyes remained on Evelina, as though the 100 people staring at them were irrelevant. That somehow made it worse. Or better. She couldn't decide. Behind her came an enraged voice. "What the hell are you doing with her?" Evelina turned. Tristan had returned without Sloane, apparently for the leather document case lying near the table where he'd abandoned the remains of his wedding obligations. But the papers were forgotten now. His face had gone rigid. Cassiel released Evelina immediately. Then he looked at Tristan. You just left her. That doesn't make her yours." A dangerous quiet settled over the room. Evelina felt something inside her recoil at the word yours. 5 years of small corrections, disguised insults, and gentle instructions suddenly seemed compressed into that single assumption. Cassiel, however, didn't rise to it. Correct. His gaze shifted to Evelina. She belongs to herself. Something in her chest stopped. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. She had kissed the man because she was furious, humiliated, and desperate to make one decision Tristan hadn't anticipated. She barely knew Cassiel beyond his reputation and the occasional business encounter. But after 5 years of being subtly managed, Cassiel Romano had just done something Tristan rarely had. He had left the choice with her. Tristan stepped closer. "Evelina, you're embarrassing yourself." There it was. The old mechanism. "Not you hurt me." Not "why did you kiss him?" Embarrassing yourself. As if Tristan could walk out of their wedding with his mistress and still retain authority over how Evelina responded. She looked down at her bare ring finger. A strange calm replaced the fury. "No," she said. "I think that part already happened." Tristan's jaw tightened. "You're emotional. We'll discuss this when you've calmed down." Evelina almost laughed. Even now he believed there would be a discussion, a private room, a reasonable explanation. Perhaps an apology, carefully designed to preserve his reputation. And somehow, she would be expected to listen. "No, Tristan." He stared at her. It might have been the first time she'd said his name that evening, without pleading for an explanation. "We won't." She turned toward Cassiel. For one terrible second, she feared he might misunderstand the gesture and offer his arm like some victorious rival collecting a prize. He didn't. He simply moved aside, leaving the path open. The choice was hers again. Evelina walked past him. Behind her, Tristan called her name. She kept walking. Cassiel did not follow. That surprised her more than the kiss. At the doors, Evelina glanced back once. Tristan stood surrounded by the wreckage of the future he'd discarded, furious because she had refused to remain inside it. Cassiel stood several feet away, perfectly still. His attention wasn't on his rival. It was on her. And for the first time that day, Evelina didn't feel like the woman someone had rejected. She felt like the woman who had finally walked away. By 9 the next morning, Evelina had learned that humiliation traveled faster than sympathy. Her phone contained 43 missed calls, 72 messages, and enough notifications to make her turn it face down on the kitchen counter. Someone had photographed Tristan leaving the wedding with Sloane. Someone else had captured Evelina throwing her ring. Unfortunately, 3 separate guests had captured the kiss. The clearest photograph showed Evelina gripping Cassiel Romano's collar while his hand rested against her waist. She stared at it for 5 seconds, then locked her phone. "Excellent," she muttered. Very dignified. Tristan had called 26 times. His messages progressed predictably from anger to concern. "Call me. We need to discuss what you did. You don't understand, Romano." Then, eventually, "I'm worried about you." That one almost made her laugh. Sloane's message was shorter. "Throwing yourself at another man 5 minutes after being dumped isn't the victory you think it is." Evelina deleted it. By 10:30, she was at Hart Atelier. Work was safer than sitting at home wondering how many strangers were discussing the size of her body, the collapse of her engagement, or the identity of the man she'd kissed. Her studio assistant had enough survival instinct not to mention the wedding. For nearly 2 hours, Evelina buried herself in fabric samples and revised drawings. Then the front door opened. She looked up. Cassiel Romano walked inside. The atmosphere of the studio seemed to rearrange itself around him. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, his expression composed, his presence almost absurd among shelves of ceramics, textile books, and handmade lighting samples. Evelina's stomach tightened. She had spent all morning wondering whether he would call. Apparently the answer was no. He simply appeared. "Mr. Romano." "Evelina." She folded her arms. If he had come to discuss the kiss, she intended to survive the conversation with whatever dignity remained. Cassiel reached into his coat pocket. He placed something small on her desk, her pearl earring. Evelina blinked. "You lost it last night." She touched her empty left earlobe instinctively. "You came here to return an earring?" "Yes." She waited. Cassiel waited too. No flirtation, no mention of Tristan, no suggestion that their photograph had probably already reached every executive and criminal with an interest in Romano Dominion. Evelina narrowed her eyes. "That's all?" One dark eyebrow lifted. "Were you expecting flowers?" "No." "Good. I dislike predictable gestures." A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Cassiel's mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but close enough to make her suddenly aware that this was the man she had kissed in front of her entire wedding. She picked up the earring. "Thank you." He nodded and turned toward the door. That irritated her for reasons she couldn't explain. "Cassiel." He stopped. "About last night. You don't owe me an explanation. I assaulted your personal space in front of approximately 100 people. You kissed me, without asking, and then you stopped." "So did I." Evelina studied him. "Tristan says I don't understand who you are." For the first time, something colder entered Cassiel's expression. "Tristan says many things when he's frightened." "Should I be frightened?" Cassiel considered her question rather than dismissing it. "Not of me." It wasn't a comforting answer. Oddly, she appreciated that. He opened the door. "Keep the earring somewhere safer." Evelina looked at the pearl in her palm. I usually do. Yesterday was unusually chaotic. That almost smile appeared again. I noticed. Then he left. Evelina stood motionless for several seconds. Her phone began vibrating on the desk. Tristan. She declined the call without hesitation. Then she looked toward the door Cassiel had disappeared through. Yesterday, she'd kissed a dangerous man because she wanted Tristan to react. This morning, Cassiel had managed to leave her curious without trying to provoke anyone at all. That felt considerably more dangerous. 3 days later, Evelina discovered that curiosity was considerably harder to ignore than heartbreak. Tristan's calls had slowed, although they hadn't stopped. Sloane had disappeared from her messages. Heart Atelier had become her refuge again, filled with deadlines that required decisions more useful than wondering why Cassiel Romano had kissed her back. Unfortunately, Romano Dominion had become impossible to avoid. A hotel renovation she'd consulted on months earlier required revisions, and by Thursday afternoon, Evelina found herself inside one of Cassiel's corporate buildings with material samples spread across a conference table. Cassiel entered near the end of the meeting. Everyone changed. Backs straightened. Conversations shortened. A senior executive who had spent 20 minutes arguing about marble suddenly became remarkably agreeable. Cassiel barely seemed to notice. Evelina did. She had known he was powerful. She hadn't understood how quietly that power operated. When the others finally left, she remained behind, gathering samples. Cassiel glanced at her. "You've been staring at me." "I've been observing." "That sounds more professional." "It was intended to." He almost smiled. Evelina slid a fabric book into her case, then stopped pretending she hadn't been waiting for an opportunity. "Why did you kiss me back?" Cassiel's expression didn't change. "Because I wanted to." The simplicity irritated her. "That's your entire explanation?" "You asked why." "I kissed you because I'd just been publicly humiliated and temporarily lost my mind. I assumed something similar. And you happened to think humiliating Tristan sounded entertaining." A pause. "Yes." Evelina stared at him. "At least you're honest." "I find dishonesty inefficient." She closed her case harder than necessary. "So I was convenient." "No." Something in his voice made her look up. Cassiel leaned one hand against the conference table. "Do you remember the Bellamy project?" Evelina frowned. Then she did. 2 years earlier, Heart Atelier had been invited into a preliminary design consultation for a Romano Dominion luxury property. Evelina had been younger, nervous, and deeply unimpressed by the proposed interiors. "You were there?" "I owned the building." "I know that. I mean, in the meeting. I was at the end of the table." Heat crawled up her neck. Cassiel continued. "The lead designer spent 40 minutes explaining why everything was sophisticated." "Oh, God." "Then you looked at the presentation and said it looked expensive and completely soulless." Evelina remembered the silence afterward. She also remembered Tristan's lecture that evening. "You can't talk to people like that, Evie." Powerful men remember disrespect. Apparently, he'd been right about one thing. Cassiel had remembered. "I was criticizing the design." "You were correct." "You fired them?" "No, I made them redesign it." She blinked. Cassiel's gaze remained steady. "You were the only person in that room who wasn't trying to determine what answer I wanted before speaking." For once, Evelina had no clever response. He hadn't remembered her because she was Tristan Rowe's fiancé. He hadn't mentioned her body. He remembered something she had said when she hadn't even known he was listening. Cassiel straightened. "So, yes, Watching Tristan's face was enjoyable. Evelina rolled her eyes. But that wasn't why I kissed you back. The room seemed suddenly smaller. Then what was? His eyes held hers. I already told you. Because I wanted to. This time the answer landed differently. Evelina picked up her case. You're very annoying, so I've been told. Frequently, not to my face. She laughed despite herself. Cassiel opened the conference room door for her, making no attempt to touch her as she passed. In the corridor, Evelina realized something unsettling. For years, Tristan had trained her to wonder whether she was too loud, too difficult, too opinionated. Cassiel Romano had remembered her precisely because she had refused to make herself agreeable. And for the first time, Evelina wondered what might happen if she stopped trying to be smaller at all. Tristan arrived at Heart Atelier the following Monday, without an appointment. Evelina was reviewing stone samples when she heard his voice at reception. Tell her it's important. For 5 years, that tone had meant she was expected to rearrange whatever she was doing. This time, she kept working. When Tristan entered anyway, Evelina looked up slowly. You're trespassing. His expression tightened. Can we not behave like strangers? You brought another woman to our wedding and announced that you wanted her instead. Strangers would actually be an improvement. He closed the studio door behind him. I came because I'm concerned. Evelina almost admired the performance. About? Romano. Of course. Tristan moved closer to her desk. You don't know what kind of man he is. And you do? I know enough. There was something beneath his anger she hadn't noticed before. Fear. Cassiel's name didn't merely irritate Tristan. It unsettled him. He's using you, Tristan continued. This is about me. That made Evelina laugh. Tristan stared at her. You think this is funny? I think it's fascinating that you still believe everything I do is about you. His face hardened. You kissed my biggest rival at our wedding. Our cancelled wedding. Because you wanted to punish me. Yes. The admission stopped him. Evelina had no reason to rewrite what happened into something prettier. I was furious. I wanted to hurt you. It was impulsive, immature, and extremely public. She folded her arms. Then I went home. And now you're seeing him. I've spoken to him. Don't be naive. There was that voice again. The patient, superior one Tristan used whenever he wanted her to distrust her own judgment. He doesn't date women like you. Silence. Tristan seemed to realize too late what he'd said, but Evelina had heard variations of it for years. That dress is ambitious for your figure. Those people are very image-conscious. You know how difficult elite events are for you. He had rarely called her unattractive. He'd been cleverer than that. He had simply taught her to assume everyone else was thinking it. Tristan stepped closer. You know what I mean. Yes, Evelina said quietly. I finally do. His expression softened, mistaking her calm for injury. Evie. Don't. He stopped. You think Romano actually wants a woman like you? The question landed exactly where Tristan intended, only this time it found scar tissue instead of an open wound. Evelina considered it. I don't know what Cassiel wants. Tristan's mouth curved faintly, as though he'd won. Then she looked directly at him. But I finally know I don't want you. The satisfaction vanished from his face. For several seconds, Tristan said nothing. Evelina understood then that he'd expected anger. Tears, perhaps. Even revenge made sense to him, because revenge still placed him at the center of her emotions. Indifference was different. You'll regret saying that. No, I regret how long it took. She opened the studio door. Leave. Tristan stared at her, then walked out without another word. 3 days later, Hart Atelier lost the Ashbourne contract. The client apologized repeatedly, blaming a sudden restructuring. Evelina might have believed them if the project manager hadn't quietly called afterward. Tristan had contacted one of the investors. Questions had been raised about Evelina's professional stability following the wedding scandal. She sat alone at her desk after closing, staring at the termination email. For 5 years, Tristan had made her smaller with words. Now that the words no longer worked, he was reaching for something else. Her livelihood. Her phone lit up. A message from Cassiel. Dinner Thursday. Evelina stared at it. For one reckless moment, she wanted to tell him everything. Cassiel had enough power to make Tristan regret breathing in her direction. That was precisely why she didn't. She typed, "Dinner is fine, but I'm choosing the restaurant." His response came almost immediately. Naturally. Evelina smiled despite herself. Then she reopened the cancelled contract. Tristan wanted her frightened enough to run toward a stronger man. He still hadn't understood. She wasn't looking for another man to manage her life. She was learning how to manage it herself. Miles Hartwell entered Evelina's life carrying architectural plans, 2 coffees, and absolutely no fear of flirting with her. He was the lead architect on a boutique hotel project Hart Atelier had recently secured, and unlike most men in Evelina's professional orbit, Miles never disguised interest behind ambiguity. By their 4th meeting, he placed a coffee beside her drawings. "Oat milk. 1 sugar." Evelina looked at him suspiciously. "You remembered? I design buildings for a living. Remembering structural details is important. My coffee order is structural? To workplace morale." She laughed. Miles smiled. Across the studio, someone cleared his throat. Evelina turned. Cassiel stood near the entrance. He had begun appearing more often since their dinner. Not constantly, and never without some plausible connection to a project. Romano Dominion was considering Hart Atelier for 2 properties, which gave him legitimate reasons. Today, however, Evelina suspected legitimacy was struggling. Cassiel's gaze moved from her to the coffee, then to Miles. Introductions were made. Miles offered his hand without hesitation. "Cassiel Romano. I've heard a lot about you." "I imagine so." Miles laughed. Cassiel did not. Evelina bit the inside of her cheek. For the next 20 minutes, she discussed the hotel plans, while Cassiel reviewed samples for an entirely different project. At least he pretended to. When Miles mentioned the cafe where he'd bought the coffee, Cassiel looked up. "Their coffee is terrible." Evelina stared at him. Miles shrugged. "She seems to like it. She has low standards in coffee." Evelina slowly lowered her pencil. "Careful." Cassiel returned his attention to the samples. 2 days later, Miles asked her to dinner. Not ambiguously, not disguised as business. "Friday night. Dinner. No floor plans." Evelina smiled. Before she could answer, a familiar voice came from behind her. "Which restaurant?" She closed her eyes briefly. Cassiel. Miles named it. Cassiel considered the answer. "Overrated." Evelina turned around. "Do you materialize whenever another man asks me somewhere?" "No. The timing is remarkable." Miles glanced between them, clearly entertained. "I'll let you think about Friday." After he left, Evelina folded her arms. Cassiel inspected a lamp as though it had personally requested his attention. "What's wrong with the restaurant?" "Poor service. It has excellent reviews." "Reviews can be purchased." She stared at him. Then understanding arrived. Slowly. Delightfully. "Are you jealous?" Cassiel looked at her. "No." The answer came so smoothly that Evelina almost respected it. Almost. You just ran a background check on him. A pause. Cassiel set down the lamp. That's standard procedure. For architects? Silence. Evelina's mouth twitched. Cassiel. He works on a project connected to one of my properties. No, he doesn't. Another silence. He might eventually. She laughed. Actually laughed. The expression on the most intimidating man she'd ever met became almost offended. You investigated my date. I verified that a man attempting to spend time with you isn't dangerous. I can do that myself. I know. That answer softened her amusement. Cassiel wasn't apologizing for being concerned, but neither was he suggesting she required his permission. So what did your terrifying intelligence network discover? That Hartwell has no criminal history, his finances are clean, his former business partner considers him irritatingly ethical, and he volunteers twice a month at an architectural preservation foundation. Evelina blinked. That sounds terrible. I found it suspicious. She laughed again. Cassiel watched her. Something in his expression changed. Not possession. Not anger. Something far less comfortable for a man accustomed to controlling almost every variable around him. Want and uncertainty. Evelina stepped closer. You know I might say yes. To dinner? Yes. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And you're not going to stop me? Cassiel's eyes settled on hers. I could secure every entrance to this building before sunset. That wasn't my question. I know. He paused. But who you have a dinner with isn't mine to decide. The teasing left Evelina's face. There it was again. Power held deliberately behind a boundary. Cassiel could investigate Miles, dislike his coffee, insult his restaurant, and apparently invent hypothetical business connections. But he couldn't command Evelina to choose him. That frustrated him. She could see it. And somehow, that restraint affected her more than jealousy itself. Good, she said. Cassiel nodded, then glanced at the coffee on her desk. It's still terrible. Evelina smiled. You're impossible. And yet you're smiling. She was. That was the problem. Because Tristan's jealousy had always made her feel smaller. Cassiel's jealousy, ridiculous as it was, revealed something entirely different. For all his influence, money, armed security, and whispered authority, Cassiel Romano had finally encountered a situation his power could not solve. Evelina had to choose him, and for the first time, the possibility that she might was beginning to frighten her, too. The second contract disappeared on a Wednesday morning. This time, Evelina didn't need anyone to explain why. The client had been enthusiastic 48 hours earlier. Then one of Tristan's development partners joined the financing group, and suddenly Hart Atelier was considered too exposed to reputational complications. Evelina read the email twice. Then she forwarded it to her attorney. Not Cassiel. Her attorney. That distinction mattered. By noon, anger had replaced disappointment. By 3, she had reorganized the project calendar, called 2 prospective clients, and warned her staff that the lost contract would not affect anyone's job. At 4:30, Tristan walked into her studio. Evelina didn't bother standing. Leave. We need to talk. No, you need to leave. His eyes swept across the studio. Do you have any idea what you've done to my reputation? For a moment, she genuinely couldn't speak. Then she laughed. Tristan's expression darkened. You think this is funny? You abandoned me at our wedding for your mistress, and you turned it into a spectacle with Romano. You brought Sloane. You kissed him in front of everyone. There it was, weeks later, and somehow the crime Tristan couldn't forgive was still what Evelina had done after he rejected her. He stepped closer. "People think I'm weak because of you." "No, Tristan. They think you are weak because you can't accept that the woman you discarded stopped waiting for you." His face changed. Evelina stood. "And now you're interfering with my business because humiliating me privately doesn't work anymore." I was protecting those investors. From an interior designer? From your instability? Evelina stared at him. The word was deliberate. Another attempt to make her question whether her anger was evidence that something was wrong with her. It didn't work. "Get out!" Tristan moved around the desk. "Stop acting like you're suddenly powerful because Romano wants to sleep with you. Get out!" "Evelina." She stepped away. Tristan caught her wrist. Everything stopped. His grip wasn't brutal. That almost made it worse. It was casual, automatic. The physical version of every correction he'd made for 5 years, the assumption that if Evelina resisted, he was entitled to hold her in place until she listened. "Let go." Tristan didn't. The studio door opened behind him. Cassiel entered. He took in the scene once. His expression barely changed. That frightened Tristan more than shouting would have. Cassiel crossed the room. No threats, no dramatic violence. He simply took Tristan's hand, removed it from Evelina's wrist, and positioned himself between them. "You don't touch someone after she tells you no." His voice was quiet. Tristan stepped backward. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" Cassiel said nothing. "To play protector. To take what belongs to me." Evelina's anger sharpened instantly. "Stop!" Tristan looked past Cassiel at her. "He's stealing my fiancé." "You don't have a fiancé." "You know what I mean." "No." Evelina stepped around Cassiel. "I know exactly what you mean." Tristan stared at her. "You still think I was something you owned." His jaw tightened. Evelina held his gaze. "You can't steal something that walked away from you." Silence. Cassiel didn't add a word. He didn't need to. For once, the most powerful man in the room wasn't the one ending the confrontation. Evelina was. She pointed toward the door. "If you contact my clients again, my attorney will handle it. If you come here again without permission, I'll call the police. If you touch me again, you will deal with me." Not Cassiel. Me. Tristan looked between them. Something bitter crossed his face. Then he left. The door closed. Evelina exhaled. Cassiel's attention dropped to her wrist. "Are you hurt?" "No." He nodded. Nothing more. No promise to destroy Tristan. No demand that she let Romano security guard the studio. That restraint made Evelina suspicious. "What are you thinking?" Cassiel looked toward the door. "Several things you would object to." Despite everything, she nearly smiled. "Then don't do them." His eyes returned to hers. "All right." The answer surprised her. "You're just agreeing. You said no." The simplicity of it struck deeper than she expected. Evelina looked at the place on her wrist where Tristan's fingers had been, then at Cassiel, the man who could command companies, security forces, and an empire whose true boundaries she was only beginning to understand. He possessed enough power to frighten Tristan without raising his voice. Yet when Evelina established a boundary, Cassiel stopped. Power, she realized, wasn't what separated the two men. It was what each believed power entitled him to do. The investigation began without Evelina asking for it. 3 weeks after Tristan grabbed her wrist, a financial review connected to one of his largest developments uncovered discrepancies. Then another appeared. Payments routed through consulting firms, inflated invoices, undisclosed liabilities hidden from investors. By the time Evelina heard about it, Attorneys and auditors were already involved, Cassiel told her over dinner. Tristan has a problem. She put down her fork. What did you do? One eyebrow lifted. Interesting that you assume I did something, Cassiel. I requested information concerning an investment that affects Romano Dominion. The irregularities were already there. And now? Now several people are looking at them. Evelina studied him. She had gradually understood what being Cassiel Romano actually meant. Romano Dominion's polished corporate empire was only the visible layer. Beneath it existed security networks, political relationships, financial leverage, loyal men who asked few questions, and an underground organization powerful enough that people lowered their voices when discussing him. If Cassiel wanted Tristan destroyed, he probably wouldn't need to touch him. A cancelled loan, a frightened partner, a vanished alliance, enough pressure in the correct places and Tristan's empire could collapse. Can you ruin him? Cassiel didn't insult her with false modesty. Yes. How quickly? A pause. Quickly. Evelina leaned back. And are you going to? Cassiel watched her carefully. I haven't decided. I have. His expression cooled slightly. Evelina. No. She reached across the table, not touching him, but making sure he understood. If you destroy him because he hurt me, then my entire future still revolves around Tristan. Cassiel became silent. I kissed you because of him, she continued. That was enough. I don't want to date you because of him. I don't want my business saved because of him. And I don't want to wake up one morning knowing you burned his life down as some romantic gesture to me. He interfered with your company, and my attorney is handling it. He put his hands on you, and I told him what would happen if he did it again. Cassiel's jaw tightened. For a man accustomed to solving problems through force, influence, or money, doing nothing was clearly its own form of violence. Evelina softened. This isn't me defending Tristan. I know. This is me refusing to build the next chapter of my life around punishing him. Cassiel looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. The investigations proceed independently. No interference. None on your behalf. She narrowed her eyes. That qualification sounds suspicious. It means if Tristan's misconduct affects my companies, I will respond as chairman of Romano Dominion. Fair. And if he threatens you physically? I know. No. Cassiel's voice became quieter. I don't think you do. Something dangerous passed behind his eyes. Evelina understood. There were boundaries Cassiel respected because she demanded them. There were also boundaries the Mafia boss considered absolute. She reached across and touched his hand. Then let's hope Tristan finally learns something. Months passed. The investigations widened without Cassiel's intervention. Investors withdrew. Projects stalled. Tristan's carefully manufactured reputation began collapsing beneath problems he had created himself. Sloane stayed beside him at first. Then photographs appeared of Tristan outside Heart Atelier. Stories circulated about his calls to Evelina. Eventually, Sloane understood what Evelina already had. Tristan hadn't chosen one woman because he loved her more. He needed possession, and losing Evelina mattered more to him than having Sloane. She left him before winter. By then, Evelina barely noticed. Heart Atelier had recovered both lost contracts through legal settlements and gained 3 larger ones through referrals. Evelina hired 2 designers and stopped apologizing when clients called her ideas bold. Cassiel remained in her life, not as revenge. That distinction had changed everything. They argued about restaurants. He continued hating Miles's coffee, even after Miles began dating someone else. Evelina discovered Cassiel secretly preferred old jazz to the fashionable clubs his empire owned. He discovered she stole fries from his plate after insisting she wasn't hungry. Their attraction stopped feeling like a weapon aimed at Tristan. One evening, Evelina found Cassiel watching her while she reorganized samples in the studio. "What?" "At first," he said, "I enjoyed watching him lose his mind." She gave him a dry look. "Romantic." I wasn't finished. Cassiel stepped closer. There was no audience now. No wedding. No rival watching from across the room. His hand settled lightly against her waist, waiting rather than pulling. Then I realized I stopped caring whether he was watching. Evelina's smile disappeared. That was the confession. Not that Cassiel could protect her. Not that he desired her. Not that he could destroy Tristan. He wanted her when there was nobody left to defeat. Evelina looked up at the man feared by half the city and understood the strange limitation he'd willingly accepted. His power could secure a building. It could protect an empire. It could make enemies disappear from boardrooms and alliances collapse overnight. But it couldn't make Evelina love him. That choice belonged entirely to her. So she made one. She rose onto her toes and kissed him. This time there was no anger in it. 1 year later, Tristan Rowe no longer mattered. His empire hadn't collapsed because Cassiel destroyed it. It collapsed because investors stopped trusting numbers Tristan could no longer explain. Projects disappeared. Partners distanced themselves. The influence he had treated like permanent currency evaporated with remarkable speed. Sloane was long gone. Evelina rarely thought about either of them. Heart Atelier now occupied twice its original space. 4 designers worked beneath her name, and clients came specifically because Evelina's work was bold, warm, and unmistakably hers. She had stopped apologizing for that, too. Cassiel remained Cassiel. Romano Dominion had expanded internationally. Men twice as loud still became careful when he entered a room. His legitimate corporations continued growing, while the darker empire beneath them remained something respectable society preferred not to examine closely. With Evelina, however, power worked differently. He never interfered with her contracts, never decided where she could go, never asked her to soften an opinion because important people were listening. And when she disagreed with him, Cassiel sometimes looked irritated. Then he listened anyway. One evening, they stood alone on the terrace of his penthouse after dinner. Cassiel looked at her. "Do you regret kissing me?" Evelina smiled. "The first time?" His eyebrow lifted. "There have been enough since then to require clarification." The first kiss was angry. She stepped closer. The second was curiosity. Another step. The third was definitely your fault. "That is historically inaccurate." She laughed. Cassiel's hand settled at her waist. "And this one?" Evelina remembered the woman standing in a wedding hall a year earlier, wondering whether being abandoned proved every insecurity Tristan had carefully planted inside her. She wasn't that woman anymore. Not because Cassiel had taught her she was beautiful. Not because a powerful man had chosen her. Somewhere between rebuilding her company, enforcing her boundaries, and refusing to let revenge become her future, Evelina had finally stopped asking whether she was too much. She placed her hands around Cassiel's neck. "This one is mine." Then she kissed him. There was no Tristan watching, no humiliated bride, no audience, no revenge, only choice. Months later, when Cassiel asked Evelina to marry him, she made him wait exactly 7 seconds before saying yes. Not because marrying the city's most feared Mafia boss proved she'd won. Tristan had stopped being the measure of victory long ago. She said yes because the man everyone feared had never once asked her to become smaller, so he could feel bigger. And Evelina Hart would never make herself smaller again.